Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about our next really important macromolecule, which is going to be lipids. Alright, so these are your fats and oils. Generally, fats have gotten a bad rap over the last however many years, kind of like how carbohydrates have. So a lot of people adhere to low carb diets, some people adhere to low fat diets. And a lot of that has to do with some misconceptions about how these things interact with your body and the amount of calories, etc. But a lot of that also stems from the fact that nutritional science is not really that great. All right. So fats and oils, what's the thing that they all have in common? Well, it is that they are hydrophobic. As you'll see here in a second, their structures are really different. So something like this coconut oil here, is going to be solid at room temperature. All right, I'm willing to open this package up, hold it over my laptop, and I'm not really worried about this ruining my laptop, right? It is solid. Whereas if I have something like this olive oil here, all right, this is going to be a liquid at room temperature, and I'm definitely not going to open this up and pour it on my laptop. All right, and that also comes from structure, once again, dictating function. And we'll get into the difference between why that coconut oil or this butter right here are solid, whereas my olive oil is liquid. All right, so lipids. What do they all have in common? They're basically long-term energy storage because of these long hydrocarbon bonds. Hydrocarbons, just like the gasoline you put in your car or the coal we can dig up and burn to power electric plants to turn on our lights. It's exactly the same thing. Those hydrocarbon bonds have a lot of energy stored, a lot of potential chemical energy is stored there. So it's a very good concentrated energy source. Like most things in biology, here we go. We're seeing carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen again. So lipids usually have these long hydrocarbon chains, these bonds of carbon with a bunch of hydrogen surrounding them. And we kind of separate these into three different groups based on the way they look. So we have our fats, our phospholipids, and then we have our steroids. Unlike our other biological macromolecules, these guys do not form polymers, okay? So they're not really made of these long chains like how carbohydrates are, proteins are, or DNA is. I mean, nucleic acids, because RNA is also one of those. So it's not these long, nice, beautiful, continuous chains of molecules. They kind of have their own little smaller subunits. And then the reason they hang out together is they have what's known as van der Waals reactions between the electrons of their different molecules. And they all kind of just hang out together, but they're not really covalently bonded the same way carbohydrates, nucleic acids, and proteins are. So you can kind of see this long hydrocarbon chain right here. Here's an example of that. And this is very good for energy storage because that is a lot of bonds real close together that we could break for energy. So how do we make fats? It's composed of two parts, a glycerol, which is a 3-carbon alcohol, plus a fatty acid tail. So the fatty acid has this long hydrocarbon tail, and it has this carboxyl group, which is COOH. It kind of has that as a head, whereas our glycerol, you can see here, has all these hydroxyl groups. It's kind of hidden by this enzyme, but it has these OHs, OHs, OHs attached to each one of our carbons. And guess what? We're back to dehydration synthesis again. So you stick our fatty acid tail plus our glycerol together so that hydroxyl interacts with that carboxyl, and guess what we lose? Water. So we stick them together using dehydration synthesis. So synthesis put together. How are we putting it together? Through dehydrating, so by losing water. So usually you'll see these things as triglycerols or triglycerides are fats. And they are linked together through what is known as an ester linkage. So like our carbohydrates are stuck together with those glycosidic linkages, we call this an ester linkage. So when you stick your hydroxyl plus your carboxyl together, you're going to lose the H that was here, and you're going to lose an OH or an HO that used to be here, and you're going to stick them together, and you're going to lose water. So here's an example of that happening. Dehydration synthesis happens 3 times, And so every time we make a triglyceride or a triglycerol, we are losing 3 water molecules to put that together. So how do fats store energy? Well, it's these long hydrocarbon chains, and hydrogen and carbon, they have very similar electronegativities. So are they polar or nonpolar? Well, they're going to be nonpolar. If they're nonpolar, are they hydrophobic or hydrophilic? They're going to be hydrophobic. So what's our function here? Energy storage, very concentrated. All those bonds have so much energy, twice the energy of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates have 4 kcals per gram, whereas fats are going to have 9 kcals per gram. So a reason that low-fat diets were initially popular is because people were like, well, if I want to reduce my calorie level, I should get rid of fats because they have all of these extra calories that carbohydrates don't have. The problem there is if you have a high carbohydrate diet, like we talked about, those carbohydrates actually go into long-term storage on your body and get burned for fat. So we have all these different, or get turned into fat, for long-term storage. So we have these different metabolic pathways, and carbohydrates are the first thing that your body wants to use as fuel. And if it doesn't use them, it actually puts them into long-term storage as fat on your body. So that's why we have low carb diets. All right. And another really important thing is they are going to cushion your organs. So if they're rattling around and bumping into each other, that would hurt. So they're kind of like the shocks between your organs, these fats. And then another one, they're going to insulate your body. So they help to keep you warm. Think about whales. All right. So back in the 1800s, we actually hunted whales and killed whales, a lot of them, and other things like dugongs, unfortunately. And the reason for that is those hydrocarbon tails and all of that fat. So you render that down, and guess what? Now you have an oil that you can burn the same way you can turn petroleum into gasoline and other products. All right, so it was just basically whale gasoline. All right, so why do we like fatty foods? A lot of calories there, okay? All that carbon is bonded to a bunch of hydrogen in our saturated fats. So why is my coconut oil here solid? Well, it has to do with the structure of what that looks like. So if you have every single carbon saturated with a hydrogen, so what we mean by saturated here is that it's going to be covered in hydrogen bonds. So every carbon has 2 hydrogens on it, and there's no carbon-carbon double bonds. It ends up with this nice, very straight structure, and that can give us totally solid fats because you can pack a lot more molecules together more closely together, and that's really what a solid is things packed close together, whereas a liquid is things kind of bumping around but still being separate. All right. So most animal fats are going to be saturated fats. So if you cook up some bacon and let that bacon grease cool off, you will see that it immediately turns back into a solid. Same with my coconut oil here. It's going to be solid at room temperature. That's because it is a saturated fat. Now, traditionally, saturated fats have gotten a bad rap as contributing to cardiovascular disease and plaque deposits. That's not really the case. Saturated fats kind of fall into a middle ground of whether they're healthy or not healthy. Current meta-studies that are coming out are really showing that there isn't a link between saturated fat consumption and heart disease. Like I will say over and over again, the state of nutritional science is not very good. It's not really well understood, so it's a ripe area of research if that's something you are interested in, which a lot of people are because health is very important. All right, so unsaturated fats are going to be having carbon-carbon double bonds in fatty acids. So this is going to be like the fats found in plants and fish, vegetable oils, and obviously like my olive oil here. You can hear it, see it. That is liquid at room temperature. So those kinks that we have made right here between carbon-carbon double bonds, that's going to allow these things to be a little bit more spread out. They can't get as close to each other, so they are going to be liquid. All right. As you can see here, this dude, you have all these kinky little tails here, and that is going to keep them separate, and you can't get as many as close together, so those are going to be liquid at room temperature. So mono unsaturated versus polyunsaturated, well, let's think about the language we're using here. Mono means one. Poly means many. So a monounsaturated fat is a unsaturated fat that only has one carbon-carbon double bond, okay, whereas a polyunsaturated fat is going to have multiple carbon double bonds, so it's going to be even more kind of bendy and kinked up, all right? So a classic example of like polyunsaturated fats are kind of what you're going to see in fish, so like omega-6s and omega-3s. Polyunsaturated fats we cannot generate ourselves. You have to eat them. That's why certain fish are considered healthy. All right, so here's a kind of summary of saturated versus unsaturated. You can see here saturated. These are going to be solid at room temperature. These guys are going to be liquid at room temperature. These are much more temperature stable. They can withstand higher temperature, higher heat. That's another reason that generally saturated fats are better for cooking, whereas unsaturated fats are better for things like making dressings. Okay, you don't necessarily want to cook these guys. All right. We come to phospholipids, extremely important. This is the reason life is able to do life stuff. Why? Because this is an amphipathic molecule. So if we break that language down, pathos is from the Greek word for experience. And if you think about the word amphibian or amphibious, that means it can experience both things. So an amphibian lives on both land and water. So amphipathic means it can experience both hydrophobic and hydrophilic states. And that's because it has these two different parts here. Oops, let me go back. So what's a phospholipid? It's a glycerol plus a fatty acid tails plus this phosphate group. So if you look here, here's our glycerol, but unlike a triglyceride, we don't have that third fatty acid tail because that section that would be bonded to that is actually bonded to a phosphate group with a negative charge. And then we can add another functional group to the end of here, and that's going to have a positive charge. All right. So hydrophobic or hydrophilic, well, it's going to be both. The fatty acid tail is going to be hydrophobic. The phosphate head is going to be hydrophilic because this choline functional group you see here has a positive charge, and our phosphate is going to have a negative charge. So the split personality, we call that amphipathic. Why is that so important? Well, one part's attracted to water, one part is repelled by water. So that interaction is what gives us cells. Okay, so hydrophobic, attracted, hydrophilic is going to be hiding from it. So these can self-assemble into bubbles. We call those bubbles micelles. So early cells really could have just been these interactions of a phospholipid maybe trapping some self-replicating molecule inside of it. And now we have a cell. Now we're on our path to life, which is really, really cool. This gives us the phospholipid bilayer that we have. So here you go, here it is. They create a barrier in water that define the outside versus inside. So you can self-assemble these things like this, and now you have water out here, and you have these separating the outside of a cell from an inside of a cell simply by arranging the hydrophilic parts of themselves towards water and the hydrophobic parts of themselves away from water. So a cell membrane. That's exactly how soap works. Finally, we come to our last thing, which is steroids. As you can see here, they look nothing like our other fats. So like I said, the thing that links all of these together is that they are hydrophobic. So these 4 fused carbon rings here, you can kind of think about those long hydrocarbon chains, except now we've replaced some of those hydrogen bonds with carbon bonds, and we've started to form rings with those tails. All right. So different structure creates different function. What's the important thing here you need to know is that it makes cholesterol. Cholesterol is the precursor to steroids. These are very important in animal cell membranes, and they're the precursor of all other steroids like your sex hormones, okay? So high levels in your blood can contribute to cardiovascular disease. However, we don't really know how the cholesterol in the food you eat actually contributes to blood serum cholesterol levels, because the majority of the cholesterol in your body actually synthesizes itself. Once again, another area of research that needs to be looked into. So cholesterol is really good in cell membranes because it helps keep them fluid. Okay, it creates space here in our phospholipid bilayer. And the most important thing though is it actually helps create all of these different hormones. By changing functional groups on cholesterol, you get all of these different hormones which can create different signals and do different things in your body. All right, so that's all I have for you guys today. Thanks a lot for your time, and stay curious.